You walk onto the lot, and for a second you feel it. New car smell, sunlight bouncing off a windshield that has never seen a scratch, a salesperson smiling like you are already old friends. It feels like freedom. It feels like a reward for years of hard work. Then someone walks you into a small back room with fluorescent lighting and a desk covered in paperwork, and the freedom disappears fast. Somewhere between the test drive and the signature, an ordinary purchase turns into psychological warfare, and one side has trained for it for decades while you've done this maybe 5 times in your entire life. Every question gets deflected. Every number gets buried under a bigger number. Every silence gets filled with pressure. That room, not the showroom floor, is where the real business of a car dealership actually happens, and in 2026, that business is starting to break apart. The dealers who built billion-dollar empires by controlling access to a product every American needs are watching the walls close in, from vanishing profits on the car itself to a legal shield that finally has real challenges. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a 100-year-old industry learned to weaponize your own exhausted brain against you, and why that same industry is now the one running out of time. This is the story of how the most protected retail monopoly in the country is losing its grip, one furious customer at a time, and almost nobody outside the industry is losing sleep over it. Walk past the sales floor, and you will find it. A small office with a closed door, a computer screen angled away from you, and a finance manager whose entire job is not to sell you a car. It is to catch you at the exact moment your brain stops fighting back. Behavioral scientists have a name for what happens after 3 hours of negotiating and running numbers in your head. They call it decision fatigue, and it is real. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for weighing trade-offs and saying no, runs on a limited battery, and by the time you reach that back room, yours is nearly dead. The dealership knows this. It is not an accident that the F&I office comes last. It is the entire design. Layer on top of that the sunk cost fallacy, the quiet voice telling you that you have already invested 3 hours, so you might as well say yes rather than start over somewhere else. That is the trap closing. By the end of 2025, front-end margins on the car itself had fallen to just $279 per deal, gutted by internet pricing tools and side-by-side comparisons. So the real money moved into that back room. In that same stretch, F&I offices set a record for profit per vehicle retailed in November at $2,025. That number was never a sales metric. It was a tax on exhaustion, collected from a brain too tired to say no. The car became the bait a long time ago. The finance office became the trap, engineered around the one moment you were guaranteed to be at your weakest. But the markups and the finance office games were never the real threat. Those were just symptoms. The real threat was a company the entire industry had spent years mocking, and it was about to prove that dealerships were never actually necessary in the first place. Drop a comment and tell me the exact moment your own prefrontal cortex gave out, the moment you realized you had stopped negotiating and started just agreeing. I read every single one. Rewind to 2021, and you can see exactly where the goodwill died. Somewhere on a lot in Michigan, a buyer who had waited 8 months for a Ford Bronco found a sign taped to his windshield. $30,000 over sticker. Take it or leave it. He left it. Someone 2 lots down did not, and drove off in a truck that cost more than most people's first house. Computer chip shortages had gutted new car production, and inventory that used to sit for 2 to 3 months suddenly barely existed at all. By early 2022, dealer stock nationwide had collapsed by nearly 90% from 2 years earlier, and some stores were down to less than 2 weeks of cars on the ground. Most industries respond to that kind of scarcity by protecting their most loyal customers. Dealers did the opposite. They invented a fee and called it a market adjustment, and it had nothing to do with the manufacturer and everything to do with greed. By the time the shortage eased, 8 out of 10 buyers had paid sticker price or more, and roughly a third had been hit with a fee they had never even heard of before signing. Buyers remembered every single one of those numbers. When supply finally normalized, customers did not come back grateful. They came back suspicious, running their own numbers before they ever set foot on a lot. And that suspicion would define the next 5 years of this industry's slow, public unraveling. For over a century, one law stood unquestioned everywhere in America. You could not buy a new car directly from the company that built it. Every state passed franchise laws, forcing automakers to sell exclusively through independent dealers, and those laws were never about protecting you. They protected a business model. Then Tesla refused to follow the script. No dealer network, no franchise agreements, no middleman standing between the factory and the buyer, just a showroom, an app, and a direct line from production to your driveway. The industry laughed. Lobbyists sued to shut it down state by state, and in several states, they actually won for a while. But the model kept working anyway. By 2025, Tesla accounted for almost the entire 4% of new vehicle sales in America that bypassed franchise dealers completely. That is not a rounding error. It is a proof of concept, and it could not be unseen. Ford built a digital ordering platform that lets buyers configure and reserve a car before ever setting foot on a lot, and is testing an agency retail model in Europe. General Motors rolled out a digital retail platform now used by nearly 1,000 dealers. Mercedes is running its own agency pilot overseas, and Volkswagen-backed startup Scout Motors is urging the Department of Justice to eliminate the franchise laws outright. None of these automakers can say the quiet part out loud, since dealers are still their partners and their political shield in every state house in the country. But the direction is unmistakable. Every dollar a manufacturer captures by selling directly is a dollar it no longer has to share, and the people who once needed the franchise system are now the ones working hardest to root around it. Every one of those digital platforms is aimed at the same target, the cost of just keeping a dealership's doors open. But the real reason dealerships are panicking has nothing to do with the cars. It is buried in a financial ticking time bomb called the floor plan. Dealers do not own the cars sitting on their lot. They borrow the money to buy that inventory from the manufacturer, park it on the pavement, and pay interest on it every single day until a customer drives it away. That loan is called a floor plan, and for most of the last 2 decades it was a manageable cost of doing business. Then interest rates climbed, and inventory stopped moving. In the second quarter of 2025, net floor plan expense per vehicle rose by about 39%, roughly $139 more for every car sitting on the lot. By November 2025, the industry was carrying nearly 3 million vehicles in new inventory, an 88-day supply, up from 71 days the year before. At 7% interest, a $5 million floor plan costs about $958 a day in interest alone, close to $29,000 a month, on cars nobody has bought yet. That interest bill never shows up on your sticker price, but you are the one who ends up paying for it, quietly folded into every negotiation on every car that sat too long. Every extra day a car sits unsold is a day the dealer bleeds money on it, silently, whether or not a single customer walks in. And with new vehicle prices at record highs and buyers pulling back, more cars are sitting longer than they have in years. The loan that once quietly funded this entire industry is turning into the very thing that could sink it, one unsold car and one accruing day of interest at a time. For years, the used car lot was the one part of a dealership that almost always made money. Higher margins, faster turnover, less competition from the manufacturer itself. That reliability is now cracking, and not for the reason most people expect. Wholesale used vehicle prices are not collapsing. They actually hit a 2.5-year high in early 2026. The real damage is happening underneath the price tag, in the loans that make those prices possible. Subprime auto loan delinquencies hit their highest level in 32 years in January 2026, with 6.90% of borrowers at least 60 days behind on payment, the worst reading since 1994. Picture what that number actually looks like on the ground. Silent lots of repossessed cars stacked bumper to bumper, tow trucks running double shifts through the night, auction houses were moving vehicles for pennies on what borrowers still owed. Total delinquent auto loan balances pushed past $60 billion in 2025, and that stress did not stay contained to Wall Street. It closed dealerships. Tricolor, a major subprime lender and retailer across Texas and California, filed for bankruptcy and shut down about 60 locations. America's Car-Mart, one of the largest buy here, pay here chains in the country, was forced to close 42 dealerships in a single week in April 2026 just to protect its lending business. These were not small operators. They were proof that an entire financing engine, built on stretching buyers into loans they could barely afford, had finally started grinding its gears apart. So if the cars are not the problem and the loans behind them are breaking anyway, The real question is, who is still fighting hardest to keep this whole system standing? The answer is a small army of lobbyists, and they have been winning for longer than you would think. The National Automobile Dealers Association is not a trade group in any casual sense. It is one of the most effective lobbying operations in American retail history, and in early 2026 its leadership stood on a stage in Las Vegas and openly celebrated a year of victories. NADA President Mike Stanton told the room the group's primary mission was protecting the franchise system from any further growth in direct sales, pointing to that 96.2% figure as proof it was working. In 2025 alone, NADA helped defeat a Federal Trade Commission rule that would have added new disclosure requirements to the buying process, helped end federal EV tax credits on a timeline that protected dealer inventory, and helped roll back California's authority to set its own emissions rules. Meanwhile, the automakers pushing for direct sales started fighting back through different channels entirely. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation wrote directly to the Department of Justice about state franchise laws, a move industry press described as triggering a holy war between manufacturers and dealers. Scout Motors is pursuing the same fight in court, arguing the franchise system exists only to protect an outdated middleman. For over 100 years, franchise laws survived because nobody with real money challenged them directly. Now, two of the most powerful forces in the American economy, global automakers and a lobbying machine with deep pockets in every state house, are finally colliding head-on, and one of them is going to lose serious ground. While lobbyists fought in courtrooms and legislatures, ordinary buyers were quietly reaching a breaking point of their own. In the first quarter of 2026, the average monthly payment for a new vehicle hit a record $770, with the average new car loan reaching almost $44,000. To make that payment look survivable, lenders kept stretching the loan term. 13% of buyers are now signing loans of 84 months or longer, nearly double the rate from 2019. Stretch a loan that long, and depreciation wins the race every time. The average trade-in customer is now just over 4 years into ownership, owes roughly $22,000 on a vehicle worth about $28,700, and walks away with barely $6,700 of real equity. That is the math behind negative equity, and it drags an entire generation of buyers backwards every time they trade in. Somewhere in that math is a version of you, or someone you know, sitting in a dealership finance office right now doing exactly this arithmetic in their head and hoping it comes out better than it actually does. Something finally broke. New vehicle sales fell 9% year over year in the first quarter of 2026, even as manufacturer incentives rose toward $3,400 a vehicle, and total consumer spending on new cars dropped 7% to $136 billion over the same period. That is not seasonal. It is millions of people doing the math themselves and simply walking away from a purchase their parents once considered a rite of passage. The customer did not lose interest in cars. The customer lost patience with the price of pretending they could afford one. Every piece of this story, the finance office, the markups, Tesla, the floor plan, the lenders going under, the lobbying, the buyers walking away, has been building toward the same conclusion, and it is not one that the dealership industry is going to like. Franchise laws still stand in almost every state. NADA still wins most of its fights in Washington. 96% of new cars in America still get sold the old-fashioned way. On paper, the industry looks untouchable. But look past the paper, and you can see a business quietly consuming itself. Dealership consolidation has continued for a 10th straight year, as smaller operators sell out to larger groups chasing economies of scale. The average dealership still posted around $4.1 million in profit in 2024, but new car margins have shrunk to just 5 to 7%, meaning more of that money now comes from finance offices and service bays than from the car itself. Lenders that fueled a decade of easy credit are now watching their own portfolios buckle. None of that is a single dramatic collapse. It is something slower and more permanent, a business model built on friction, hidden fees, and a tired brain in a back room, finally meeting a customer who has every tool needed to see straight through it. The dealership is not disappearing tomorrow, but the century of unquestioned leverage it once held over every single car buyer in America is over, and it is never coming back. So here is the real question. Now that you know the F&I office is built around your own exhaustion, now that you know the floor plan, the lobbying, and the loans behind the lot, will you ever walk onto a dealership again without seeing exactly what is happening to you? Subscribe if you want to keep building that kind of economic literacy before your next big purchase, not after it.